Hi everyone, my name is Shalhevet Schwartz, and this is Gefet on Daf Yomi, a joint project of Hadran and Yeshivat Drisha. We are now making our way into the second parak of Sanhedrin, where we get to take a bit of a break from thinking about the structure of the judiciary and the justice system, and the legal system, and we get to um, this parak really takes us deep into the weeds about the question of leadership in Jewish society, of the separation of powers, of the different forms of political leadership. Um, And specifically, the sugya that we're going to look at today, right? A lot of this parak deals with the rules with respect to a king, and what we're going to take a look at today is the way that the Gemara looks at Mishpat HaMelech, a story in Sefer Shmuel, or a speech in Sefer Shmuel in the Navi, that outlines what the reign of a king is going to look like, and the question of really what the rights and responsibilities of a king are with respect to his people. So let's begin. The Gemara on Daf Kaf it starts with a machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Kol ha'amur b'Parashat HaMelech, Melech mutar. Everything that was described in Parashat HaMelech, in this speech in Sefer Shmuel. So this is said in the name of Shmuel the Amora, but about a speech in Sefer Shmuel about that Shmuel HaNavi gave. So everything that was said in that parasha, and Rashi will explain, will point us to what the content of that is. So all of that stuff that Shmuel the Navi said a king will do, Melech mutar, a king is allowed to do. Rav Amar lo ne'emra parasha zo ela la'ayem alehem shene'emar som tasim alech hamelech shetehei emato alav. Rav Yamora, on the other hand, explains that this speech in Sefer Shmuel did not mean to outline what the actual rights of a king are. Rather, it was just meant to evoke reverence in the people, right? That the people ought to revere the king. Kitnai. So the Gemara is going to link this to a machloket Tanaim, this machloket between Shmuel and Rav. Rabbi Yossi Omer Kol Amor b'Parashat Melech Melech Mutarbo, exactly what Shmuel said. The Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lona and Ra Parasha Zoel Kedei La'ayem Alehem Shene Amar Som Tasim Alech Hamelech Shetehei in Mato Alav. So Rabbi Yehuda says exactly the same thing as Rav. Now the Gemara continues in the quoting the machloket Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So it's continuing in this bright on the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Right, there were three mitzvot that Am Yisrael was commanded when they came into Eretz Yisrael. One, la'amid lahem melech. Two, la'achrit zar oshal malech. And three, leave no zar oshal malech. And three, leave no lahem beit habachira. So, the appointment of a king was one of the mitzvot shemutal, right? Nitztavu Am Yisrael when they came into Eretz Yisrael. We'll stop there for now. Now Rashi on our sugya adds a couple of notes, and we'll see that what emerges from Rashi is that actually one of the lines in the Gemara is there's a machloket about the girsa. So the Parashat HaMelech, what does Rashi say? Sefer Shmuel that Rashi just points us towards the paragraph in Sefer Shmuel, right, where Shmuel is giving this speech after Am Yisrael requests a king, where Shmuel tells Am Yisrael exactly what the king is going to do. It's like, I know you want a king, but here's the deal. What he's going to do, he's going to take your children and put them in his army and put him in his service. He's going to take your daughters to be in his service. He's going to take your fields. He's going to essentially take all of your property in even more than an eminent domain sort of way. He's actually going to just confiscate all of your property so that it can serve the needs of his kingship. That's the speech in Sefer Shmuel. And so Rashi is just noting that Parashat HaMelech, as quoted in the Gemara, is referring to this speech in Sefer Shmuel, that he's going to take your sons, daughters, fields, etc. Primarily, right, the Iyun here is going to be about what the king's rights to just simply get up and take private property that belongs to individual citizens. Rav Amar Lo Ne'emra Parasha, Rashi continues, right, that when Rav says that Lo Ne'emra Parasha Zo Ela Le'ayin Alehem, that the point of this parasha is not to outline what the actual rights of the king are, but is simply to tell you what he will do so that the people will revere him properly. No, lo ne'emra parashat Shmuel alehem shetehei emat kal kam alehem, aval eno mutar la'asot. Ad kan, it's what it seems like we saw in the Pshat. right? Hafi Garcina. So now Rashi is saying that is our girsa. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Lona Amra Parasho Ela La'ayim Alehem. That to give them a sort of kind of reverence or fear. The Logaras, what's the girsa that we don't have, says Rashi? Liyaram Ulevahalam. To scare them and terrify them, to freak them out, right? La'ayim is to generate reference as opposed to liyaram ulevahalam, which is more like to freak them out, right? And according to that gears, right? Why not that gears? So it says Rashi Dehala Rabbi Yehuda Yafek Kivnu, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda, which we see when we saw in the Machloket Tanaim, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, appointment of a king was one of the mitzvot that needs to Am Yisrael shenichnasu la'aretz, right? It's something that they had to do. And therefore they're right, they were of good intention. It wasn't Shmuel trying to freak them out. As opposed to, right, if you look back at the story and you read it in the context of Pshat, Shmuel got upset when Am Yisrael asked for a king. And so it seems like this girsa liyaram ulevahalam to freak them out, maybe even is closer to the Pshat in the Sefer in the story in Sefer Shmuel in the Navi, that actually maybe what was going on was that Shmuel was trying to freak them out for when they asked for a king. He didn't think it was a good thing that they had asked for a king. Shmuel Hanavi, maybe was thinking, if I tell all about Am Yisrael all of the horrible things or the scary things that a king is going to do, it'll freak them out so much that they will take back their request. So that's the second girsa that Rashi kind of notes might be there, but he says, no. Actually, the girsa is to generate a certain kind of reverence, shetehei emato alecha, right? That part of the command to have a king, which is a mitzvah according to this read in Rav here, is that the people have to have proper reverence, and therefore that Hanavi isn't describing everything a king is allowed to do, rather he's only describing the things that the scary, the most intense things that the king will do, so that the people have proper reverence for him. Now we're going to see that the Yad Ramah reads the sugya differently, reads the sugya according to the girsa that Rashi mentioned. So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Kol Amar Parashat HaMelech Rav Shmuel Dechtiv Zeh Mishpat HaMelech, right? He's also taking us to the relevant psukim in Sefer Shmuel. Rav Amar Lona Emra Parasha Zo Ela Kedei Liyaram Ulevahala. So Rav, what Rav says according to the Yad Ramah is the girsa that Rashi wanted to reject, that Kedei Liyaram Ulevahala, right, to scare them and to terrify them, to freak them out. Why? Right? He says it even the most explicitly, right? He wanted to freak out freak them out right about the fact they had made this the citizenry had made this this not good request, right? This improper request. And that really Shmuel was describing all these things, not only that the king is not allowed to do, right, that the king is not allowed to do, so that they would be so scared that they might take it back. Right. So just based on the girsaot that the Rav and the Yad Ramah are bringing here thus far, right? Rav Amar Lona Amar Parashazo Ela Ayim Alehem, right? Rav thinks the request for a king was positive, and that Shmuel Hanavi was trying to generate reverence for the king. Yad Ramah, on the other hand, says Lona Amar Parashazo Ela Kedei Liyaram Ulevahalam, to freak them out, right? Because Rav thinks that it was a problem to ask for a king, and that therefore Shmuel is trying to scare Am Yisrael to convince them maybe to take it back. Right now, the potential problem with the read of the Yad Ramah is that kitnai that we saw earlier in the Gemara, right? What did we see? Right, the Machloket Rav and Shmuel, and then we saw kitnai. Shmuel presumably thinks like Rabbi Yossi, Rav thinks like Rabbi Yehuda, and then we saw that Rabbi Yehuda says later on that shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael shenichnasu la'aretz, right? That one of the appointment of a king is a mitzvah. And therefore, that the request to appoint a king presumably was a good or a proper request, not an improper request. And if we think that that Rav's statement, Lo Nemra Parasha Zu, right, it goes with Rabbi Yehuda's Shita, then theoretically to say that what Rav was saying, that Rav is saying that the whole parasha was just meant to scare them, to get them to take it back, seems like it's a tough read, right? How could Rav hold like Rabbi Yehuda? Because on the one hand, right, Shalosh Mitzvot Nitztavu Yisrael Satan La'aretz. On the other hand, if you think that Lo Nemra Parasha Zu Ela Liyaram Ulevahalam, which is what the Yad Ramah says, and that it's Mipnei Amei Haaretz Shebahen Shish'alu Shelo Kehogen, that they asked Shelo Kehogen, how does that fit with Rabbi Yehuda's Shita? So that's why the Yad Ramah offers a second possible reading of the words Liyar'am Ulavahalam, which brings him closer to Rashi's understanding of the text. Right, v'ibait, right, if you want, you could say, right, Kedei Liyar'am Ulavahalam, what does that mean? Mipnei HaMelech, to scare them, to freak them out of the king. So ultimately, right, the Yad Ramah offers a second explanation of the words Liyar'am Ulavahalam that fit better with, right, that fit kind of with the way that Rashi explained the text, that fit better with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Right? Rashi, on the other hand, right? Often, whenever you see a Hafi Garcina in Rashi, but Rashi has the girsa that we have in our Gemara, it should give us pause. We should think that maybe actually the original girsa was the one that Rashi doesn't have, that the printers follow Rashi, and that when Rashi comes to tell us that actually the proper girsa, right, is the one that we ultimately have. That might be that Rashi was preferred this girsa because it made more sense, but that maybe it might give us reason to think that maybe the other gears, so the one that made less sense, might actually be the original. So Rashi's changing, or at least preferring the girsa of Rav that right, the version of it that would fit more clearly with Rabbi Yehuda's position, which is to say which makes it clear that the request for a king, according to Rav, was a good thing. Ad kan, this machloket Rashi and the Yad Ramah. What we're going to close with now is a question that Tosafot asks about, right, about not about Rav's opinion, which was lo ne'emra parasha zo ela le'yaram le'yim that really the Parashat HaMelech does not actually generate or does not list real rights of a king, real things that are mutter for a king to do. So Tosafot's going to ask a question about Shmuel's opinion, which we saw first, which is kol she'namar b'Parashat HaMelech melech mutarba, that Sefer Shmuel HaNavi, right, that Shmuel HaNavi's speech in Sefer Shmuel, actually outlines the rights of a king. So that's Shmuel's opinion, Shmuel the Amorah's opinion, and Tosfot is going to ask two questions about it, generate two problems with this position. Tema, number one, Lama ne'enash achav al navot, kevan shelo ratzalim korlo karmo. Wait a second. If a king is allowed to confiscate property willy-nilly, why is it that Achav, the king of Am Yisrael, was punished for confiscating Navot's vineyard? And Tosfot doesn't only read Gemara, he also reads Tanakh. And we saw that Navot is punished for taking a field that Navot didn't want to sell him. That Achav is punished for taking a field that Navot didn't want to sell him. Number two, Od de beperek hakonis ton nadir. So we see that there's a story in Bava Kama that describes, right, a midrashic description of, right, that David asked permission from the Sanhedrin before asking whether he could take grain from Am Yisrael and replace it with plishtiv grain that was better. So, right, Shmuel's position that Parashat HaMelech outlines the king's rights. So it doesn't fit well with either the story of Achav, who gets punished for taking a field without that Navot doesn't want, or taking a vineyard that Navot doesn't want to sell him. And number two, the fact that David had to ask permission to take grain from Am Yisrael to feed his animals. So this is just the story in Bava Kama that we don't really have time to go into right now. But let's look at several of Tosfot's answers. So Tosfot, it's a long Tosfot. He gives 6 different possible answers. Answer number 1. So what's the heter in Parashat HaMelech? The heter in Parashat HaMelech is to just take stuff for his own personal use, not his own private use, but to take things for public use. And Achav wanted to take Navot's vineyard for private use. Answer number 2. אבל כשהיה שואל אחאב שימכרו לו, חשב נבות שרשות בידו לומר לו אמכור. So what's the answer number 2? That if he had wanted to take it for free, he could have, but the fact that he offered to buy it, the fact that he wanted Navot to sell it to him, made Navot think that he would be able to say no. And once he had made Navot think that he'd be able to say no, he basically given up his right as king to confiscate the property. His rights were only to confiscate the property, but by offering to buy it, he gave up that right. Answer number 3, Odi Shlomartin and Nash Mipish Sha'al HaKerem לעשות הכרם לעשות עבודה זרה, תכתיב והיה לי לגן ירק, כמו שמתקדשים ומטהרים אל הגנות. So Parashat HaMelech permits a king to take property for his own use, but nothing can permit a king to serve avodah zarah. The problem wasn't really a problem klape avot. The problem that Ahav was punished for was really that he wanted to take this field for avodah zarah. Maybe a king doesn't have any responsibilities klape his people, but klape Hakadosh Baruch Hu, right? Of course, the king doesn't have a heter goref in that realm. Answer number 4. נגדן שהריץ אינו מותר רק בשדות הרחוקים מן העיר, דלא מעלה כל כך. אבל כרם נבות היה אצל היכל אחאב בשומרון. So maybe actually maybe the king is only able to take property that is far away, that maybe aren't as good quality, what Tosafot adds here, but that's something that Kerem Navot, which was in Shomron, right near the palace of the king, right, that would be a problem. Only land far away is part of the heter of Parashat HaMelech. And number 5, what Yish Lomar did dafka b'sadeh makneh aval sadach huzach yerash me'avotav la Moshe yeshiv navot chalila limititi nachalat avotai. So that maybe the problem really was not a problem with confiscating land. He can confiscate land, but only bought land. The king can't take land that's part of Yerusha, part of Nachala, right? There's some kind of sanctity to the idea of Nachalat Avotai, and that's why Navot doesn't want to sell it to him. Maybe that is out of a king's domain. And to number 6, Yinami Parashat HaMelech lo ne'emra rak al melech shenimlach al kol Yisrael v'Yehuda meid hamakom v'achav lo malach Yehuda v'gam lo malach meid hamakom. Maybe all of these heterim in Parashat HaMelech only apply to a bona fide Melech Yisrael, someone who God has appointed and rules over all of Am Yisrael, this kind of ideal form of melucha. And Ahav, even the kings of Yisrael in the Tanakh didn't really fit that Torah ideal. Maybe David did, but right since the time when the melucha hitpatzla, right, the time when the melucha was split, that no longer, right, that all those heterim no longer apply. So just to kind of look at all of these different answers of Tosafot laid out, and see what each of them really say about what kind of zechuyot, what kind of rights a king has, and how in total the king's authority is. And right, answer number when we see that if the answer number 1 that the heter is only for public use, right, the king has all these rights from Yeshivat Drisha, but they're not personal rights. They're only kind of public rights, things that allow him to serve his to better serve his people. And it could even be that's also part of what's behind answer number 4 too. The idea of land that's far versus land that's near, that maybe part of what's happening there is that a king's rights to confiscate land is part of what's in service of the kingdom. Land is far away. Maybe that's part of expansion or security or something like that. On the other hand, answer number 2, right, that the heter is only to confiscate, not to force purchase. Maybe, right, part of what's going on there is that the idea that, okay, sure, a king has total authority over his people, but not to manipulate them. And that part of what was going on with Kerem Navot when he offered to buy the land, and therefore kind of at that point gave Navot the idea that he could say no, is that, right, manipulation isn't part of what a king can do. A king can confiscate, sure, but a king can't manipulate. Answer number 3 and answer number 6 have something in common, which is that, right, answer number 3, there's total heter, but you can't use fields for idolatry. That's not part of the king's domain and part of the king's authority. The king doesn't get to just do whatever he wants. He has responsibilities klapei Hakadosh Baruch Hu, even if he doesn't have responsibilities klapei his people. And answer number 6, right, that answer number 5. Answer number 5, which is that the heter doesn't apply to inheritance, right? Maybe there are some things that are still sacred, right? It's right. The limitations on a king aren't with respect to his people. With respect to his people, he maybe has a certain kind of total authority. But there are some things that are still sacred. Inheritance is still sacred, right? Idolatry is still something that's totally off limits to a king. And answer number 6, right, that the heter applies only to a king who is appointed by God over all of Am Yisrael, that maybe there's this ideal form of authority or an ideal form of monarchy, of melucha, of monarchy that the Torah imagines. And in that there's total authority. But that really, when we think about the governmental structures and political structures that Am Yisrael actually lived with throughout the generations, that most of them didn't even come close to that ideal illustrated by the Torah. And given that, the political authority of a king had to be significantly curtailed or walked back. So hopefully, right, these different answers of Tosafot give us different windows into what it means, what kind of authority the Torah imagines for a king, right? How the ideal meets the real, right? How that maybe the king is a figure who has right total authority and no responsibilities to his people, but maybe that's only insofar as he's using that right that authority for the good of the kingdom for public good. Thanks so much and see you next week.